welcome to Church Experience Online. We're so happy you joined us today. As you watch this teaching video, if you have any questions or need help getting connected, please don't hesitate to reach out by phone or email. Also, our website is the best place to go if you would like to access helpful Growth Steps resources, join a serving team, connect in a life group, get your questions answered, or support this movement financially by giving online. At the end of this teaching video, you'll hear one of our Church Experience original worship songs, and we hope that gives you an opportunity to worship and reflect on what you learned. Thanks again for joining us at Church Experience Online.
One foot in front of the other.
Beginning is easy, finishing is hard. You know, they say the beginning is easy, but continuing is hard. And maybe you have hit reset sometime recently. You know, we're in the midst of a new year, and we've been teaching on this theme of resetting our lives here in 2018, and maybe you've done that. I'm sure you can think back to some point in your life when you changed something or tried to change something, and you hit that reset button, and what happened? Well, you had some initial momentum, you unleashed the power of a fresh start in your life, and you started moving in a more God-honoring direction, and you were excited about where God was taking you, and it seemed like your veins were just pumping with enthusiasm. But then what happened after that? You got into it a few weeks, maybe a few months, and then it got hard. It got difficult, and it was so easy to slip back into old patterns, how you used to be, the things you used to say, the places you used to go, and all those changes that you tried to make very quickly caught up with you and tried to pull you back to where you used to be. How do you sustain change? How do you change something, hit reset, and then continue along in that journey of making progress? How do you do that? It's such a hard challenge for all of us. You know, beginning is easy. Continuing is hard. Well, if that's where you're at and you're in the midst of making changes, I want to encourage you and help you in sustaining those changes. As we look at a story from the book of Exodus and God's Word, and it's a story of His people, the nation of Israel, who hit a major reset in their journey. See, they were held captive by the superpower of that era, Egypt, and their Pharaoh was pulling out of them a tremendous amount of benefit for himself through their slave labor, and he was utilizing their services, and they were in bondage to Egypt, to Pharaoh. Well, God was going to set them free on a new journey. They were going to take new land. In fact, he had a promised land, what we call it, set aside for them. And he was going to release them from slavery. But I think in looking a little bit closer at their story and watching how they reset, how they moved on to a new and better place in their lives, how they got set free from some things in their past and moved ahead, I think there's so much that you and I can learn from their story. Some great lessons we can learn. And so let's jump in Exodus chapter 7. Exodus chapter 7, verse 2. You are to say everything I command you and your brother Aaron to tell Pharaoh, let the Israelites go out of his country. God went to Moses, he went to Aaron, these two great men of God, and he said, I want you to be the leaders. I want you to go. I want you to tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Jumping down in verse 6, Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. They honored God. They listened to God, and they stepped into this huge task of going to confront the leader of the superpower nation in their era and tell him to let go of all this free labor that he was benefiting from, to free them. Verse 7, it says, Moses was 80 years old when he received this calling from God. Aaron, he was 83. And they were asked to go speak to Pharaoh. 80 years old, 83 years old. Imagine just getting this assignment, let alone being in your 80s and being asked to go stand before the most powerful, potentially most powerful person on the planet at that time. You know, I love the fact that they were in their 80s because, some of us in the room, maybe you feel like you missed it. Like if I could just go back to that early era of my life and if I could just have a do-over, then maybe I could get it right that first time around. But now I've kind of missed it. I've missed my prime or I missed that opportunity. And I would just say to you that you are not living God's plan B leftover. See, because God is sovereign, meaning he's in control, because he's all powerful, because he already outside of time knew what you were going to do anyway, you don't get to live like the leftover plans of God. No, he's with you, and he will, if you will allow him, fulfill everything that he wants to do in your life today. He will accomplish every plan that he has for your life, for your future, if you allow him. God doesn't let you just kind of skate through life on plan B. No, he's got a great plan in your life, and whatever limitations you feel like are holding you back, they don't hold back God. You might say, well, it's my age, it's my past, the things I used to do, the person I used to be. Listen, whatever your limitations are, they don't limit God. In fact, that's the lesson I would love to have you write down is my limitations don't limit God's might. God's so powerful that you say, well, I don't know. I mean, you might be like Moses. He said, I don't speak well. How can I go confront Pharaoh? How can I go talk to Pharaoh on God's behalf when I stutter and I can't even talk well? God said, I can use you. I can. We've been talking about this in teaching series. God can have more faith that God can, and he can. And you say, well, I can't. And too many people are stuck on I can't. I can't make this change. God can. If you'll step into it and follow him, God can. I can't do it. Well, maybe not in your own flesh and your own power, but God can. I've never been that way before. I've never done that. I've never finished that. I've never attempted that. God can. See, don't get caught up on I can't. Your limitations don't limit God. They might limit you if you allow them, but they don't limit God. So don't put a cap, don't put a ceiling on your own potential in life because you think I can't. Because even if that's true that you can't, you're just seeing the edges and the limits of your humanity, but you're not accounting for the fact that there's the divinity in our lives. It's not just the humanity, but it's the divinity. It's the God of the universe whose spirit is inside of us as followers of Jesus, who his power is pumping through our veins, is in our lives. He breathed breath into us, and he wants to empower you to do what only he can do. So God can. Is there things that we can't do? Are there actual limitations in our life? Absolutely. We know this from experience. We can see this in the world around us. We know that there's limitations. But there's no limitations on God. He's all powerful. You try to step into a new season, try to walk through a new door in your life. Man, those same old voices, though, they tend to pull you back, don't they? My two younger brothers, I love them so much. Grew up and were close and still stay in touch and good friends. And man, my middle brother Brock, he's always loved messing with people. It's just like a hobby for him. If he can get under your skin, it's a good day for him. And he especially loves pestering my mother, my sweet mother. He loves just if he can get under her skin, that's just a great day for my brother Brock. And I remember one year for Christmas, my mom had got these little snowmen that she put by the front door, and they're motion censored. And so when you walk through the door, these things start like singing and dancing, and Mom thought they were great and they were cute and whatever, but my brother Brock, especially in the season of life he was in, he wasn't having it. He didn't think they were so cool. So he'd walk through the door and these things started singing. He's like, seriously? Come on, really? And so he got to the point where he just started turning them around. He'd face them the opposite direction so their backs were facing you. So the motion sensor didn't pick up when you come in. So he'd walk in and they wouldn't say anything. He'd be like, that's right, don't talk. And he just loved that. And then, my mom caught on to this, and so she'd turn him back around, and he just couldn't win that game, so he started hiding them. And he would, hide them in the closet. He's like, I told you to be quiet, He would just hide them. And he just always loved messing with my mom. And the other day, just recently, my mom has the Amazon Echo, on the kitchen counter, and he goes over to it, and he says, just try to mess with my mom, because she loves the thing. And he said, Alexa, self-destruct. And she started counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2. By the time it was at 3, 2, my mom started running for the Echo. And she grabbed the cord and pulls it out of the wall, unplugs it, trying to save her precious Amazon Echo. My brother, of course, is completely entertained by this because he knew what really was going to happen. And for the curious in the crowd that you've never done this before, you don't know what actually happens, here's what happens if you tell it to self-destruct.
Alexa, self-destruct.
Auto destruction in 5, 4,
3, 2, 1.
boom. That did not go as planned.
He just loved messing with her. I don't know if my mom's even plugged the thing back in yet. I think she's worried about what's going to happen when she does, you know? But I remember that time just so much. I mean, just Brock walking through the door and the snowmen singing to him. And it's just, it just made me think so much about how you and I, every time we try to move into new territory, every new door we walk through, those same old voices, they're talking to us. And it drives us crazy, doesn't it? I mean, it's the voice of self-doubt. You can't do it. You're not good enough. You don't measure up. And we walk through a new door, and it's that same old voice, that low self-esteem that came maybe from those words that someone said to you when you were younger. You'll never be, you can't be, whatever. It's those voices of temptation that scream out to us when we walk through a new door. Temptation to slide back into the old ways. Temptation to go a different route instead of God's direction. And man, those voices continue to try to pull us back. And people will try to label you. But as I heard someone once say, God has named you. People are going to label you, but God has named you. You're a child of God. Your future in Christ is secure. He's got a plan for you. He's got a future. We believe the best is still coming. And so even though when you try to reset your life and it's hard, there's challenges, you face limitations, you feel limitations, know that you have a God that's on your side that's more than able to help you overcome and sustain those changes. You can. With God's help, you can. And you will with God's help. Because why? Because He can. He can, so you will, and we will. It's not easy to make changes, though. It's not. And you have to remind yourself of the truth that Jesus is able. This Jesus that placed His hands on someone who could not see. They were blind. And He touched their eyes, and then they could see. That's the Jesus we follow. Not the just cartoon character that you see in the kids' Bible story and grow up. I mean, not that tame. It's like he was a radical, life-changing leader. I mean, think about Jesus. I mean, he went over to someone who couldn't walk, and He said, walk. And they got up, and they never walked, and they walked. The lame walked. I mean, that's the Jesus we follow. The Jesus who raised the dead to life and said, Lazarus, come on out of that tomb. And he got up and was raised to life. That's the Lord we follow. And that God is with you when you try to make changes. And so don't get stuck on limitations like, I can't do it. Well, maybe you can't, but God can. And so keep moving down that road. Don't let your limitations limit God because they can't limit God. Change the way you look at things. It was Wayne Dyer who said, change the way you look at things and the things that you look at start to change. So look at it different. Instead of looking at the limitations, look at your limitless God. Stop looking at your excuses and wasting time with excuses. It's always been that way. It doesn't always have to be that way. Well, I've always done that. You don't always have to do that. Don't let your past define your future. No excuses, no exceptions. Keep moving, keep learning. God's got more for you. But man, it's so easy to get demotivated. When I was in high school, I so clearly remember in the classrooms, you remember this, how they had the posters hanging on the wall, and it would have these little motivational quotes for you, and it's supposed to keep you motivated. And I remember reading these things and thinking they were kind of cool. But then I came across later in life these demotivational posters, and I saved them because I thought they were actually even more inspiring to me. I thought they were hilarious, maybe more true to reality, right? Have you ever seen these before? I have them for you. So, defeat. For every winner, there are dozens of losers. Odds are you're one of them. That's great. Failure, when your best just isn't good enough. I love it. This one, humiliation. The harder you try, the dumber you look. Come on. All right, risks. If you never try anything new, you'll miss out on many of life's greatest disappointments. Okay, consulting. If you're not a part of the solution, there's good money to be made in prolonging the problem. We apologize for any consultants in the house today. Meetings, none of us is as dumb as all of us. Okay, I love that. Idiocy. Never underestimate the power of stupid people in large groups. Okay, that's good. Despair. It's always darkest just before it goes pitch black. Ambition. The journey of 1,000 miles sometimes ends very, very badly. All right, just a couple more here. Mistakes. It could be that the purpose of your life is only to serve as a warning to others. Not so motivating, right? And finally, of course, motivation. If a pretty poster and a cute saying are all that it takes to motivate you, you probably have a very easy job, the kind that robots will soon be doing. Not so motivating, right? And then those little phrases, not those specific phrases, but those little phrases that come to your mind, don't you just hate that? You're trying to reset your life, you're trying to move ahead, and then what happens? Those things just pop in your mind, that temptation, the self-doubt, those discouraging comments that others said, just reality checks that come, and you're just like, I don't know if I can do it. I was so motivated in the moment of conviction when I said, yes, I'm going in a new direction. Yes, I'm going to move ahead. Yes, I'm going to reset my life. And then you get into it and you're like, no, this is hard. No, this is not easy. No, this is not what I expected. But don't limit what God can do because of the limitations you're hearing. God is all the motivation you need. When you lean into him and his strength, he will help you through it. Exodus chapter 7, God's people are desiring to be free. God wants them to be free. They're ready to move into a new season. And Moses comes to them, and he comes to Pharaoh and says, let God's people go. Well, Pharaoh, of course, what does he say? No. And what would you say? I mean, you're the superpower, and you got all this free labor, and some guy comes to you and says, hey, let my people go. You'd say, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't have to. Who are you? Just tell me. And so, of course, he says no. And we pick up the story in Exodus chapter 7, down in verse 14. It says, then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let the people go. He was unyielding. He did not want to let God's people go. He was stubborn. He was resistant, as will be your issues when you try to change them. They won't go down easy. They won't go down without a fight. God says, go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes out to the river, confront him on the bank of the Nile, and take in your hand the staff that was changed into a snake. It was another miracle that God had done to try to get Pharaoh's attention. Verse 16, then say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you. Let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness. But until now, you have not listened. This is what the Lord says. By this you will know that I am the Lord. With the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be changed into blood. The fish in the Nile will die. The river will stink. The Egyptians will not be able to drink its water. So this, as we would call it, plague occurs because Pharaoh was not willing to change, and God said this is going to change. And so he had to keep getting Pharaoh's attention by causing things to break down in his life so that he would actually listen to God. It's better to listen to God the first time before he has to really try to get your attention. And 10 plagues happen in the nation of Egypt so that Pharaoh will finally get to the place where he will release God's people. The 10th plague, God kills all the firstborn in the nation of Egypt, including Pharaoh's eldest son. And finally, Pharaoh says, enough is enough, I relent. He thought he was God, but he recognized that there actually was a God in heaven who was greater than he. And he said, you guys may go. But when Pharaoh first heard that these Israelites were desiring to be released, that Moses is saying, let these people go, he didn't want to change. And in your notes, I think a really helpful lesson is that there's resistance before the reward. Write that down. There's resistance. There will be. You can guarantee if you want to sustain change, you reset your life, you go in a new direction, you change something, you just guarantee you. Write it down, count on it. There will be resistance. Now, if there's no resistance, you know what that means? That means you haven't changed anything important. you just rearranged the furniture. You know anybody like that? Every 6 months, they just move the couch to the other side of the room. Voila, it's all better. It's beautiful. It's like, all right, great. Those kind of changes, you're not going to have any resistance. But I'm telling you, any big important change in your life, you're going to face resistance. You can count on it. And Pharaoh, he would not let God's people go. He said, I'm not going to change. I'm unyielding. And your issues will be unyielding when you try to change significant issues. There'll be resistance. If you want to get to the reward, you have to push through the resistance, and the reward will come. If you read Exodus 12, when Pharaoh releases God's people, God caused them to find favor with the Egyptians. The Egyptians gave them all kinds of gold and silver, and they plundered. It says literally that word, they plundered the Egyptians through that, through God's miraculous favor they found with the Egyptians, and each of them were giving these Israelites for their journey all these things, and they left with great reward. They were headed to an even greater reward. They eventually come to the land of Canaan, this land that God drives out all these wicked nations and gives them this beautiful land, this promised land we call it. So there was a reward that would come, but it didn't come until after the resistance. And there's more resistance we're going to read about here, but they faced resistance. And for you to get to the reward God has for you, there will be resistance. Your whole life might feel like resistance. And in fact, your whole life is filled with resistance because you have a devil that's resisting God's work in your life. So every time God's making progress and gaining in your life, every time you're saying no to evil and yes to good, every time you're saying no to temptation and yes to honoring God, there's a devil who's trying to stop that progress, who's trying to pull you back into your old ways. And listen, the one who's in you is greater than he that is in the world. So you can take confidence that God can help you through it. Just don't be surprised when the resistance comes, because it will come. So you want to change something in your life. You want to move to a better place. You want to get to a better place in your life, in your heart, in your mind. You say, hey, I want to get up out of this sin and temptation. I want to get out of these old patterns. I want to move up to a better place in my life. There will be resistance. Just don't be surprised when it comes. The reward is on the other side. The reward is on the other side. We were living in Michigan. We'd been there about 5.5 years, and we were staying in a home that we owned that we were very comfortable in. We loved it and really enjoyed the neighborhood we were in, the neighbors, the friends we had. We were very comfortable, and God said, hey, I want you to go start a church, and that's going to involve selling your home and stepping out, and that was uncomfortable territory for us, and letting go of what was to grab a hold on to what would be that we had no idea what it would look like and how it would go. And so we put our house up for sale and all the emotions that go with that. We moved here to a new area, and we started looking for a place to live. And then the process of selling a home and then looking for a home, we found ourselves in a third-floor apartment, a small apartment with 4 little kids, a newborn baby, 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old, and 4 little kids climbing around on each other in a little third-floor apartment. There was a lot of energy in a small place, bad recipe. Our neighbor below us was constantly with a broomstick banging on the ceiling like, can you guys quiet down? We're trying. Like, we are doing our best up here, you know, and you're trying to dig their bicycles out of the tiny little storage thing that we had all this stuff from our house, and it was all in storage, and trying to find their bikes and dig them out and carry them down the 3 flights of stairs and then carry the groceries or sleeping kids back up, and all these things that we had, which were fine and nothing wrong with them. We had just gotten used to the comfort we had, and God disrupted our comfort, and that was great. That ended up being a great thing. But in this season of, like, you know, we knew we wanted to get a house, and we were for like 10 months waiting and waiting. Well, in that process, we had found a house that was for sale. Our house was closing in Michigan, and this house here in Florida, it was a pre-foreclosure. And so it was going to need some serious work to it, but it was going to be available. It wasn't for sale yet, and Jennifer found it. So we contacted a realtor, and we're waiting. And we're waiting. Is it listed yet? Is it listed yet? And we're waiting. And in that time, we decided we're gonna start praying. And a couple things we did. We decided we're gonna pull in that driveway. No one lived there at the time, so we're gonna pull in the driveway on our way home on a regular basis. And we were just with the kids. We were just gonna pray that God would provide that house for us if that was the house He wanted us to be in as a family. And so us and our 4 kids would pull in the driveway. No idea what the neighbors thought at that point. Like, who's this family? No one lives there. They're just sitting in the driveway. And we go in there, we would pray. Our kids can tell you this still. They still remember this, especially the older kids. They can say, we would pray as a family. God, if this is where you want us to be, give us this house. And we're working on it too. We're calling. We're getting the paperwork lined up, doing everything we can do. But wasn't listed, so there was only so much we could do other than just pray, and we'd pull in the driveway, we'd pray. And then Jennifer and I decided to also do a little bit of a fast, and we gave up our favorite drinks, a soda for her, a juice for me. These favorite drinks, we're like, we're going to give these up, thinking it's going to be a few weeks, then we're going to get some good news. Well, a few months goes by, and a few more months goes by. 10 months later, we still don't have the keys. In 10 months, we've been praying, we've been pulling in the driveway, we've been waiting, we've been calling, we've given up these favorite drinks of ours. Finally, I'll never forget the day when the realtor handed us the key. Hey, the house is all yours. And we took that key and we went, I think we bought like a little Caesar's pizza, and we both bought our favorite drink, and we sat down in the living room of that empty house. We had nothing in there yet. We just sat down, our kids are running around, and we're eating this pizza, and we're drinking our favorite drinks. We're like, man, what a great reward. We're so thankful we waited. We wanted to give up so many times. It was so frustrating. Couldn't find a place, couldn't afford a place, couldn't get in the right place. And then finally it came, and we had a lot of work that still needed to be done. It was a foreclosure, but man, we got in, and we were so grateful. 10 months of waiting, the reward came. Maybe you're in the season of life where there's something you're trying to make progress on, and you're in the waiting season. Man, that's frustrating, isn't it? You want to see the progress now. You're trying to change your character, trying to form a new habit, trying to get promoted at your work. You're trying to honor God and your family, trying to raise godly kids, trying to find that special someone, and you're waiting, and you're praying, and you're doing everything you can, but no progress. There's resistance, but here's another lesson. Write this down. The dream is worth the difficulty. The dream is worth the difficulty. God's dream, not your dream, but God's dream. God's dream for you, it's worth the difficulty. There's going to be sweat in it. There's going to be sacrifice. There's going to be surrendering easier roads on the way to success, but God's dream is worth the difficulty. God's dream is worth the difficulty. Jesus knew of the Father's dream. Salvation for humanity, saving us from our sins, required him to live a sinless life and die on the cross for us and give of his life so that we can have life. He paid our debt to sin. He paid that for us. But although he was a king on his throne, he gave up all of that to come down and face the ridicule of man, the persecution of man, and eventually the execution of man on a cross so that all men can be saved. And Jesus came in Luke 22, verse 44, it says he was in the garden before the cross, and he was praying, and it says, and being in anguish, he knows he's God, he knows all that he's about to go through. It says he prayed more earnestly. And by the way, when the temperature seems to be turned up in your life and things get harder, just turn up the spiritual intensity. Just pray harder. Sneak away and get with God a little bit more often. Get into his word more. When things, don't do what a lot of people do. A lot of Christians even do. When things get harder, they just kind of give up. They blame God. They fade out of their routine. Well, I don't even have time to go to church. I don't have time to honor. That's when you need to crank things up. Say, I'm going to lean in. Things are hard right now. This is where I really need God. And that's what Jesus is doing in the garden with the Father. He's praying, and it says he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. That's intensity. He's actually bleeding, and he would bleed. His side would be pierced. His hands would be pierced with the nails as he hung him on the cross. The crown of thorns that they mocked him by would be pierced into his forehead, and he would bleed, but now he's bleeding out of sweat and this internal anguish, and he feels it. He knows what he's about to go through. But if you jump back to verse 42, his prayer, you see, says, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. I love to go another road, a different road, an easier road, yet not my will, but yours be done. I want God's dream, not just my dream. I want God's dream. And they were one and the same in many ways. But he said, Father, I want your dream. I want your will to be done. Not me. And Jesus was fully God and fully man as he came on earth. And the flesh side of him, of course, he didn't want to go through pain if it's not needed. Is there another way? But not my will, your will be done. God, your will be done. Do you really want God's dream, or do you just want your dream? Because your dream is not worth the difficulty. Because if it's just our dream, then what's it going to amount to? But if God's in the mix in it, and he said, hey, this is what I want of you, this is what I want to do, it's always worth the difficulty. Even if your whole life is difficult to get the dream of paradise and be in God's presence forever, for all of eternity, it's worth following and honoring God in this life. The dream is worth the difficulty. When we knew that God had this dream in us to start this church and what he wanted us to do, and we're still in that season, and I'm so glad you're here, a part of it here in these early days as we pioneer something together. And now we're in a high school, and we were in a home, and now we have a few services, and it's exciting to see how God's changing lives. But I remember one of the guys that started the church with me, one of my good friends still, his name is Josh, and Josh had moved down with us to help us start the church, and he's since moved back after a few years up back home to Michigan and be with his family and all that. And on his last Sunday here, we were kind of reminiscing a little bit, and we were sweating it out still all the way to the end for him here, and we were loading the trucks, and I looked down at his ankle, and he had doing setup and breakdown. He had a little cut on his ankle, and he bled a little bit, and I looked down at my hand. That particular day, I had a little cut on my hand from a piece of pipe and drape or something that cut me, and I was like, man, this is really appropriate. You know, we started together, and we bled together. And I told the breakdown team that day, I was like, guys, we're there. We've made it. Blood, sweat, and tears. We're ready to do this thing now. It's all happened now. And you know what's interesting is that in order for you to fulfill the dream God has for you, there will be some sacrifice. It will be hard. But God, when he's in it, when it's his dream, that difficulty, it's worth the dream. The resistance, it's worth the reward on the other side. It might not come till the other side. You might have to press through it, but with God's help, he will empower you to push through. You know, there's hard resets. They're not all easy. The easy resets are the things that matter less. The hard resets, where you're trying to change your family, you're trying to change your character, you're trying to change your prayer life, trying to change patterns in your behavior and your thinking. Those resets are hard. And I think a lot of people never get the reward on the other side because they procrastinate the hard things they need to do to get there. They push them off. You ever go in your closet, try to find something to wear that day, and you look through and everything's wrinkled. And you're just like, I don't know, it's a lot of work, you know? And you get to that one shirt that you're like, I haven't worn this shirt for weeks, maybe months. And you're like, but look how wrinkled that thing is. I just don't think it's worth the time and the effort to iron the thing. After the first service, someone came up to me like, you know, you can just throw the thing in the dryer. I'm like, I get it, it's the point. But man, it's a lot of work, so I'm not gonna wear the thing. So you just kind of discard that one, and you just never get to it. And I just wonder if there's some things like that in our lives that we never get around to because we just kind of keep pushing them off. We kind of keep delaying them. We kind of keep procrastinating them. Why? Because this is gonna be hard. I don't know that I feel like doing it. And God has some amazing things he wants to do in your life if you'll step into the uncomfortable. There's a lot of people who are missing out on part of what God wants to do in their life because it's unfamiliar territory, because they're uncomfortable, they don't know how they feel about it. You know, a mentor of mine, Dan Ryland, he says that, when it comes to things like, maybe simple as a workout routine you're trying to establish, you never feel like it, especially at the beginning. And his advice, which I thought was so great and applies to so many areas of our life, he says, just lace up your shoes. Just put on your shoes and lace them up. And he said, you may not feel like going for a run. You may not feel like whatever it is that God's asking you to do, but just put your shoes on. In other words, take the first step. And you'll find you start getting some momentum. You might not feel like it, but when you start doing the thing you know God wants you to do, you start stepping into it, you'll see that God will meet you in your sacrifice, and he's more than able, and he's faithful, and he'll provide for you as you step into his direction. Exodus chapter 13, let's go back to the story once again. God's people are being set free. Pharaoh is not a big fan of this, but God has cornered him into the place where he really has no other good option, and he finally relents. Although he was a wicked king, he understood that there was a good God who was more powerful than him, and he let God's people go. Exodus 13, verse 17. Exodus 13, verse 17, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if my people face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. They might go back to their old ways if it gets too hard, and I know that. Verse 18, so God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. So that they came up out of Egypt knowing they might fight. As they transition to a new land, they might face adversaries. There could be unknown people in these other lands that they would have to fight. And so they came ready for battle as they marched out of the old and they marched into the new. They were ready for battle, but God knew in their heart that they were not ready for battle. So he didn't take them on the most direct route. He didn't take them on the shortcut as they left from northern Egypt to South Canaan, which was the eventual destination for them. Might be a 4 or 5 day journey. He took them on a longer route. He took them through the wilderness. He took them toward the Red Sea, which looked like an obstacle to them that they couldn't get through. And God took them on a different route because they were not ready for battle. This is why it's so important to follow God closely in your life, to listen to him, because you and I might think that we're ready, we're good, I got this, I can make the change. You get into it, you reset the thing, and you realize, man, I'm in over my head. And God knows what you're ready for and what you're not ready for. And that's why sometimes we beg God for things and we pray, and he says, not even always that he says no, it's just he says not yet. If I gave you what you wanted right now, it would probably destroy you. You're praying for that perfect relationship, but you need to get your character right first, because if I gave you that perfect person right now, you're not ready for it, you'd ruin the relationship and they'd split. So you need to get things right. Or maybe you need some healing from that last thing that blew up first before you're ready to move on to the next thing. Maybe you need some change, some things in your heart. You need to get your spiritual life. You need to start looking up at me before you're looking out at what's next. See, there's sometimes where God, in fact, all the time, knows what's best for us, but sometimes we don't know what's best for us, and we're wanting one thing, and God's saying there's something better for you. See, God can do more through the imperfect person who will follow God in humility than he can through the person who thinks that they have it all together and they think they're perfect. See, God loves to use humble people who will submit their lives to him and trust him. But it's tempting to turn back, and God knew that they would be tempted to go backward. It's kind of another version of, the grass is greener on the other side. It's a common tendency in our humanity. In the same way, backward can look better when forward is hard. When forward is filled with resistance, I'm tempted to go backward. When forward is filled with frustration, it's easy for me to go backward. And God knew this about us, and he knew this about the nation of Israel, so he kindly led them to where they needed to go. But he said, focus on what's ahead. He was leading them, focus on me. Focus not on all the steps of the path, and focus on me and focus where you're eventually going. And I'd say that to you as you're trying to sustain some changes, you're trying to go through the difficulty right now. I'll just say this to you. I'll say this to us. Stay focused on the long term. Stay focused, most importantly, on Christ. Don't get disillusioned by the zigzag back and forth path it might take you to get there. Just stay focused on the long term. Don't give up. Stay focused on Christ, on his promises that are always true. Listen to how it says to us in Proverbs 4, this encouragement the Lord gives in verse 25. It says, let us fix our eyes straight ahead, fix your gaze directly before you, and give careful thought to the paths of your feet, and be steadfast in all your ways. Do not turn to the right or to the left. Keep your foot from evil. Stay focused. Keep pushing forward. Trust the Lord. Focus on him. Don't get frustrated by the problems, but focus on Christ. The other day we were at Safety Harbor City Park, and one of my sons went into the bathroom, this cement structure they had there, and he came out and he said, Dad, what was that loud noise? And I was sitting on a metal grated picnic table, and I didn't hear this noise. I was updating something in Evernote on my phone, and I was focused on what I was doing. Had no clue that some noise happened. I had no idea what he was talking about. I'm like, I don't know, I didn't hear it. He's like, you didn't hear that? And he's in this cement building, and he heard this loud noise out here, and I'm out here in the wide open, and I didn't hear anything. And a mother sitting like 2 picnic tables over, she heard this conversation, and she says, it was a really big plane that just flew over our heads. I think she was thinking, you didn't hear that? Like, come on, really? And so I got to redeem this moment. So I look at my son, and I'm like, son, I have this amazing ability to focus. So much so that sometimes I miss other things that are going on around me, like planes flying overhead and these kind of things. But it's an amazing ability to focus. It can also be a liability, right? And, I think that there is a focus that allows you to zero in on the long term, what God has for you, and that's good. But I think our tendency is to focus in on the things right in front of us and get distracted by all the temptations and the struggles, instead of fixing our gaze straight in front of us on Christ and saying, Jesus, I don't know what the road's going to look like. I don't know what the path is going to lead me to, but I know where I'm going eventually. So I don't know what I'm going to go through this year in 2018, but I know where I'm going to in 2018, and that's closer to Jesus, closer to the reward you have for me, eventually in eternity. But wherever it is that you're taking my life as I follow you, I believe it's somewhere greater, and you're going to do greater things. I'm going to keep my eyes on you. Don't get distracted. Stay focused on Christ. Don't turn to the left or to the right. Let's go back to Exodus chapter 14. They've been freed. They're on their journey, verse 5 of chapter 14 says, when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials, they changed their minds about them. They said, what have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services. So he had his chariot made ready, and he took his army with him. And it goes on to describe all that he brought with him. And it says down in verse 10, it says, as Pharaoh approached his whole army coming after the nation of Israel, it says the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. And they were terrified and cried out to the Lord. You ever feel like you move ahead into your future, just take a few steps, and you look back, and here comes your past, and it's following you, it's right after you, it's chasing you down, and you're like, I thought I got freed up from that. I thought I was moving ahead into the future, and then all of a sudden, it's coming right for me. It's right on my heels. That's exactly what happened. They were terrified. It causes all kinds of fear and worry when these things happen. Verse 11, it says, they said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? They were fearful there too about leaving. And he said, it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. We would rather have stayed in the past than to step out into the future filled with problems. And in your heart, you have to be really careful when you face that resistance, when you make a change and then it gets difficult, to be really careful because you can so easily start to go back to the way you used to be. You made a commitment to God, right? And you said, well, God, I'm going to honor you because I believe this is the right thing and I'm going to do this. And then you take a few steps towards whatever this is, you start getting a little bit closer to that, and what happens? You face that resistance, that difficulty comes, and in your heart, that's where it begins, you start to think, well, maybe I got it wrong. Maybe I should wait until 2019. Maybe I was too aggressive. Maybe I was dreaming too big, and we step back. In fact, if you're not careful, you'll turn back, and you go right back to captivity. You'll go back to right where you used to be, the things you used to do, the people you used to hang out with, and the places you used to go, and the sins you were caught up in. You'll go right back to those things if you're not careful when it gets difficult. And so how do you sustain change? You're doing the right thing, honoring God and follow him. So how do you stay in that and not get stuck in your old ways, not get sucked back? How do you do that? Here's the lesson in your notes. Turning back starts in the heart. It starts in the heart. Same way a fresh start begins, in your heart. Proverbs 4:23, it says, above all else, above everything else, you need to know this. Guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Guard your heart. Guard your heart. Guard your mind. This is why it's so important not to let evil things in your mind, like we talked about last week, not to let bad influences in your mind, not let yourself get in environments that are pulling you away from your faith. Why? Because it begins in your heart. And you start to think, well, maybe I should just give up. Maybe I should quit. Maybe I should settle for less. And God's got more planned for you, but it begins in your heart. If you're not careful, you want to give up. Exodus chapter 14, one more time, if we can go back to this story. Exodus 14, down in verse 13. The nation of Israel, they see the Egyptians approaching. And it says, Moses answered the people, do not be afraid, stand firm. You'll see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. So he says, stand firm. Don't let those fears grip you and pull you away. So he says, stand still. But then interestingly, he also says what seems like the opposite. He says, then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. So first he says, stand still, stand firm, but then he says, move on. And I think he's referencing the two different parts of all of our stories. There's the God part, stand firm in your faith, trust God, follow him, don't surrender to fears, don't slip back into them, don't run, stand firm, but also move on. Don't just stand there and pray and say, hey, God, you'll take care of it. No, you have your part to do. honor him, trust him. He says, tell him to quit crying out to me and move ahead, move on. He says, raise your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water, that the Israelites can pass through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so they'll go in after them. I'll gain glory through it. He goes on and he just says, I'm going to open a way for you in what seems like the impossible. He literally parts the sea. God's people pass through. This evil nation of Egypt follows them in to capture them. God steps in and buries them with the Red Sea supernaturally. And you can get into this and study the archaeology of it, and they've literally found chariot wheels in the Red Sea and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's incredible what God did. Supernatural miracle, but God freed literally his people through, sending them through what was like the impossible wall that they couldn't get through on their own. God can, he did, and he said, hey, come on, move on, let's go. I got a plan for you. So that's what God's saying to you today. He's saying, I got a plan for you. You got to trust me. You got to follow me. Keep stepping in it. You stay surrendered to me. You honor me. You live for me. I'll take care of the rest. You just keep your eyes focused straight ahead. You sustain those changes with my help. Don't slip back. Don't give up. Don't fall back into your old ways. Why? Because resetting your life now will lead to a reward later. But the last lesson you know is this. If you don't reset now, you'll regret later. You may want to write that down and think about it. Reset now or regret later. See, the reward comes later when we reset now. When we don't reset now, it's regret later. We put off the reward God has for us and all that he wants us to see in our lives. And God's got so much more for you. I'm just saying, just one guy saying to another, listen, just lean in. God's got more for you. Listen, every man, woman, and child that has the breath of life in their lungs, God has you here for a purpose. He wants to do more through you than you can imagine. Your limitations don't limit God. There's going to be difficulty. There's going to be resistance, but it's so worth the reward. Just follow him. Be faithful. Don't give up. I'm just imploring you. Trust the Lord. He's got more for you. He's going to do more in your life. Just don't give up. Sustain that change, and you'll see God do greater things. Right on?
Thanks for joining us at Church Experience Online. Please don't forget to check out the website if you'd like to get more connected, learn more, get your questions answered, or support this movement financially. You're now going to hear a Church Experience Worship original song, and we hope this gives you an opportunity to worship and reflect on what you learned today.